Known as faux rock for his ferocious hitting style, David Fulcher spent 8 years brightly in the spotlight of the NFL. We embrace them, cheer for them. They are heroes in our eyes. Yet when their time in the spotlight ends, many go on to do the most important work of their lives. They go into overtime. Welcome to Overtime, life after the spotlight with NFL All-Pro David Fulcher and his co-host, national award-winning speaker David Coleman, exclusively on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio.
But my career, after 30-something years, unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of people that remember me for one of two things, and that is one, the word that I used on the air.
Yeah.
Two, this meme that it ultimately turned into because of during my apology, Nick Castellanos hits a home run, and now that's like become this worldwide, internet
phenomenon
that goes on, phenomenon, forever and always. And I still wrestle with that a little bit. I've done my best to just say, Tom, look, at the end of the day, you don't care about what those people think. Do you really care what those people think? Because you're not even going to meet 99.9% of them. And it's easy to say, oh, who gives a darn, whatever. But sometimes that can be hard to live with, and you have to bring yourself back to, hold on a minute now. You've had a chance to do a lot of really cool stuff. You're doing it again. Let's try to move on from those things that are dark and nothing but negative all the time.
Those things, let me tell you, man, they make you stronger. Coming from Los Angeles, in a background of drugs and violence and crazy stuff, I was one of probably 10 guys who walked out of there, Eric Davis, Darryl Strawberry, Chet Lemon. There's a lot of guys from California who were good athletes, because I had more guys that were probably better athletes than I were.
Sure.
My high school football team had 40 guys on the team. 35 of those guys were Bloods and Crips. And during football season, they got along because we worked together. As soon as practice was over or game was over, they wanted to fight each other. And I said to myself, how in the world do we do that? How does that happen? But yet again, I think the man upstairs has put us three guys that are sitting here now, in a position to relate to anything that's thrown at us. I'll give you an example of one of my, I won't say a tantrum, but one of the things I went off on a reporter. We played the San Diego Chargers in San Diego, and we won the game, but David only had 2 tackles. And the reporter came up to me and he said, "Where were you?" I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Where were you in this game? Because we didn't hear your name." I said, "Well, let me tell you something. You saw the game, so I was there. And it wasn't my fault that San Diego went left instead of coming right.
That's so
They didn't run towards me." But then I had that same reporter the next week. David gets 16 tackles. We played the Houston Oilers here in town. I intercept Warren Moon 3 times. I had 2 sacks and I had 16 tackles. And that reporter came up and said, "I'm not going to ask you where you were." And I go, "Well, why not?" Because I would have answered, "Did you see the work that I put on the field?" Houston didn't run away from me, and what happened? And I think sometimes I use those. I used to use them as fuel. I'm gonna be better. I was calling my brother Mark, quarterback at the University of Arizona, when I went to Arizona State. But I was always called Mark's little brother. I was never called David Fulcher until I got to Arizona State. And I used to use that as fuel. And every day, from the time I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I have worked my butt off to be the best man I can be. Not the best athlete, the best man. And then as I've gotten older, I want to be the best father. I want to be the best husband. I'm a grandfather. I want to be the best friend. Yep. We had Bronson Royal on our show. And Bronson told us a story about how he was downtown and a gentleman was a homeless guy, was playing the guitar and had a bucket there for money. Bronson walks up, drops money in the bucket, and then starts asking the guy, "Hey, how do you play that? How did you do that? How did you make that sound?" And all of a sudden, Bronson is helping everybody. And I just think that, Tom, I got you on this show, man, because I love you and your dad. And I thought that this would be great for us because David and I are having fun. This isn't about making money. This isn't about anything else but just reminiscing with the people that we talk to that other people don't get a chance to talk to. They hear your voice on the radio, they see your face, they hear your dad's, but for them to see that, Thom ain't no different from me. Thom just has a job like I've got a job. David's no different from me. We got jobs. And David, as a national speaker, I've heard him speak at a couple of colleges, and it's almost like my Super Bowl. When I saw Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, and Roger Craig, I walked up to shake their hand because I was at awe. And I'm finna go battle with these guys. And the same way with David. When I hear David talk, and our show is about this. Our show is, how can we be a difference maker in somebody else's life?
Sure.
What can we say to help a young broadcaster who's 15, 16 years old, and he's struggling on how to get it done? And for you, Thom, if that 16-year-old boy is listening right now, what would you say to him at his early stage of how he can get to where he needs to be?
Well, look, I have a son, David, that's trying to do the same thing. He's a sophomore at Indiana University. And, a lot of people think, oh, his last name's going to get him in this, last name's going to get him in that, and blah, blah, blah. And it might open a door for him sometime down the road. But I mean, he's already
got to do the work. He still has to do the work.
He's got to do the work.
Yeah, and he's already been humbled. There were a couple things at Indiana, and as a freshman or a sophomore, maybe he wasn't going to get him. He's had a lot of chance to do a lot of stuff already, whether it's baseball, softball, football, women's basketball. But men's basketball is a big deal. And he had thought that his tape was good enough this year to get that student radio job. He didn't get it. And we talked about, keep going. And this plays right into what I would say to a high school kid trying to do it. It's the same thing I say to my very own son. I'm like, look, didn't you tell me that there was some guy there in town who does all the local high school basketball games on radio? And he wanted you to come help him out and work games? And my son says, yeah. I said, and you get paid to do that, which you don't for the basketball for Indiana? He says, yeah. I said, okay, so let me figure this out. You're getting reps, which ultimately, to answer your question, is all that matters. That's all that matters. Being a broadcaster is like being a football player. It's like being an actor in a lot of ways. Your tape will determine whether or not you get that job. Mm-hmm. When you were going to play safety for the Bengals, they didn't ask you your grade point average and wanted to see your degree from Arizona State. As a broadcaster, it's the same thing. They don't care. Most people, I've never met one that does, but there's probably somebody out there. But if a minor league team is hiring a broadcaster, a major league team, a network for football, nobody's ever asked me one time, hey, can I see your degree? Nobody's ever asked me one time, what's your grade point average? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't work to earn those things. It's not what I'm saying. But if you want to be a broadcaster, it's important to have those degrees because maybe you have to fall back and go do something else. And you have that to fall back on. But, your tape is all that matters. So there might be some guy going to Syracuse or Ohio University, which is this big, prestigious communication school, and you're going to Cincinnati State. Which some people won't look at the same as Syracuse.
Right.
Well, at Cincinnati State, you might be doing 40 of their men's baseball games or 40 women's softball games over the course of a year, where the dude at Syracuse is only doing 5.
Yes.
If I'm doing the hiring, there's a good chance I'm hiring the guy from Cincinnati State rather than the guy from Syracuse.
I love it.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Thom, you just made me think of something that happened earlier in my career, much earlier. I've done, again, we don't know each other as well as you know, David, but I've done 5,200 live appearances in front of audiences on stage during my career.
Wow.
And within the first couple hundred that I did, let's say the first 200, I remember one of the very nice young lady walked out. She was the advisor to the group that brought me in. I had just spoken to 2,500 people in a theater. It went well, standing ovation, the whole 9 yards. She walked out and she said, we can't wait to have you back next year. And she said, here's your check. I need you to sign for it. I said that. And she pulled it out of the envelope. She goes, wow, we really want to have you back. And I love you, but you just made 2 months of my salary. Good for you. Yeah. And so people always say, are you my appreciative? Are you kidding me? I know that every time I get paid, now I'm getting paid to be away from home, to be on stage, to get an audience reaction that most people don't get, to actually entertain and educate people at the same time. It's like being a 5-tool player in baseball.
Yeah.
Okay? But I will never lose my appreciation for how blessed I am to do what I do. Look who I am on a show with right now. One of the best football players to ever grace the NFL and one of the best announcers I've ever heard, making the best call, Bob Costas. Okay, Bob Costas told you you might have the best call he's ever heard. I think that's like God coming down with Santa and going, here, to be here for Christmas morning.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I got a question for you. Your relationship, if you had one, with Peter Edward Rose.
Yeah.
I still believe that they've got the Big Red Machine has some excellent baseball players. I don't know if the Reds will ever have a player like Pete Rose and the appreciation. What was your relationship with Pete? If you had one, I think you did, but what was that relationship look like?
Well, David, mine was a lot different than, say, my dad's. My dad met him when he got the Reds job in 1974, and basically my dad and Pete were the same age, basically. And so, my dad's a broadcaster, Pete's a player. I met Pete when my dad got the job in 1974. We were living in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and so I came to Tampa, Florida. My mom and sister and I had not moved to Cincinnati yet. My dad's down in Tampa where the Reds were training. And sorry, my dog is going ballistic. There's got to be somebody coming to the door.
We're all okay. We're all dog people.
We have got it all together, man.
Luckily, mine's unconscious right here on its bed.
Yeah, well, I'm glad because this one he's always going. So, at any rate, so I meet Pete Rose when I'm 10 years old, and it was interesting because when my dad was doing the games growing up, if I would go down to the ballpark with him early, say a couple days a week, I tell you what, I'm going to call a timeout here.
I can hold on.
Hang on.
Back.
So so when I'd go down to the ballpark with my dad, and from time to time, I was always allowed in the Reds clubhouse, but I was never allowed in the broadcast booth. That was a rule that they had at the ballpark, and so it is what it is. So I'd have a chance when I'd go down there to see Sparky Anderson every day, Pete Rose every day, Johnny Bench every day, Joe Morgan. I mean, I grew up, knowing these guys. They knew my name. They were always Mr. Fill in the blank to me. But then 14 years later, by the grace of God, I mean, think about this for a second. 14 years later, I'm the broadcaster for the Reds on television, and Pete's the manager. And I'm doing a show with him and Johnny Bench once a week called the Pete and Johnny Show on Channel 5 in Cincinnati.
Wow.
And then I was having to be, take off your play-by-play hat and be a reporter during the whole thing when he was getting suspended. And there are others, but the two biggest name people that everything that I went through decades later, after losing my job, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do and start this podcast and that kind of thing. The two guys that never, ever, ever said no, if I'd ask them to be on, they never said no, were Bob Huggins, the old University of Cincinnati basketball coach, who's had his ups and downs too.
Hasn't he?
And Pete Rose. And I think a lot of I think one of the primary reasons why, and David Coleman, you said this a little while ago, I think is because those guys have been humbled in their lives, man. And they're like, I'm going to, that's, I don't know about you guys, and I'd be curious to hear if you feel the same way. There have been so many great things that happened about getting fired. The time I spent with my wife, the stuff that I got to do with my kids. I mean, I got to go to every sporting event, every whatever event, graduations, move my kids into college, whatever it might be. But one of the other things that happened is, as you look back on something like that happening is that, man, I'm not judge and jury on anybody.
Huh.
You know what I mean? On anybody. I think back to situations, and that doesn't mean just something you did in public, but even stuff you did in private. I mean, what's the point of me beating down some friend if, fill in the blank, they did this or they did that? There are a lot of things that all of us have done, I'm not judging them now, where I think I was maybe in a different time.
Can I ask you this? Have you done this? And David, I've never had a chance to ask you this question. Ever since I went through the toughest of times that I did, there are things I see. I didn't know you well enough, Thom, or I would have done this with you. We just didn't know each other at the time. Have you ever seen someone else going through something and you quietly, way behind the scenes, send them a text, an email, or a handwritten note that said, "Hey, I see what you're going through. I'm a phone call away."
Oh, sure, sure. I mean, and if you don't, I think that you're missing you're missing for really at the end of the day what it's all about in life. You know, Jesus told us right before he was going to be crucified. You know, you got to love one another. That doesn't mean you got to like one another all the
Yeah.
time. I
Yeah.
mean, there are a lot of people that you just don't like for whatever reason, and that just happens, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean you're out to do terrible things to them. It doesn't mean if they were, all of a sudden choking on a piece of meat in the middle of a restaurant, you're going to just watch them sit there and die. You're going to help people when it matters. So yes, to answer your question in a long-winded way, of course you have to. I wish I'd do it more often.
Yeah, I think that we are. It's funny because as a kid growing up in LA, I mean, I went to church. We didn't miss church on Sunday, but I also remember how my mom and dad told me to treat people the way I want to be treated.
Yeah.
And treat them with respect. My kids say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, not because I told them to do that. They hear me do it.
Yep.
And I never told my kids to do that. So for us, as personalities in the field of being in front of people, some people don't know who we are. They just know, because my wife and I could be somewhere and a Bengal fan could come up and go, "Oh man, you were a beast. You were a beast." And then my wife goes, "Well, that's not the husband I'm married to." And she's being sincere and humble, because when I got on the field, I had to defend myself. I had to take care of myself. When I'm off the field, I'm just David. I take care of my family. I don't let anybody do anything crazy in my family. But I think that sometimes those people who write stories are trying to sell paper. They're trying to sell newspaper. They're trying to sell stuff on TV. So they're going to write something about us three that are on this show, that people just don't know us. And that's why I've fell in love with David on, hey man, why don't we do this show? Overtime, Life After the Spotlight. We talked about it because we've done so many shows together. David's got his own show on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio. And the thing about it is that we just want to be able to express ourselves outside of sports, where people can say, I saw that show with Thom Brennaman. That's not the same guy, blah, blah, blah. That's not the same guy. Did you hear his voice? Did you hear what he said? How passionate he is? And that's why we do what we do.
Well, that's, and you wish you could reach, so many more people out there that could use a helping hand. And David, back to the question you asked, a second ago, do you ever reach out to anybody and do that? I mean, of course you do, and you wish you did it more. But I when I was, as a number of gay men have gotten to know me ever since everything happened, and guys that really helped me very, very much through this whole sort of last 4 years, and a couple have become quite good friends.
Yes.
And I'd say to them, they'd say, we'd be talking about different things, and I'm like, man, I'm like, what really, a thing that really bothers me is that there are so many people out there, gay, straight, black, white, doesn't matter, that think I'm a homophobe.
Yeah.
And and a couple of these guys will be like, well, I know you're not. And that means the world to me when you hear that. But it bothers me that, I remember my son was a very highly decorated lacrosse goalie here in Cincinnati. He was a 2-time Ohio Player of the Year and great player, didn't want to play in college. And we play these games, and he went to 3 state Final Fours and won a state championship. And we get to some of these places against out of city teams, and there are fans chanting, at him about what I said.
Yes.
And I'm just sitting there thinking, man, I mean,
no reason for that. No reason for that.
That I've put on that to your wife and your kids, and you put onto yourself and other people that they think you're this, whatever it is. And but we keep getting back to the same thing, man. Have the faith and keep on going. Just keep on going.
And Tom, we all know this. All three of us know this. And a lot of people watching this know this. When people take shots, pot shots, there's something I talk about during my programs, and I say mediocrity takes pot shots at excellence. Mediocrity. Yeah. Find someone excellent. The mediocre people in the world will take a pot shot at them because they have two choices. Try to cut them down to live at the level they live at, okay?
Yes.
Or raise their game to live at the level of excellence that those other people call their minimum standard. And I think that shows that there's a huge gaping hole in the heart, the character, the mind, and the soul of the people who are attacking someone like that in that situation instead of raising their own game and helping someone else never lives through something like that. I hope that came out correctly.
Yeah. Oh, that did. That was beautiful. I love that. I'm going to remember that. I think that's I think you were 100% spot on.
Tom, I asked David if I could ask you this question really quickly, and then Fo, I'll turn it right back over to you. We asked your dad this question. I'm going to completely switch gears for a minute. We asked your dad this really quickly, and I'd love to hear your answers. And I'm not convinced that when I walk through the Cincinnati airport, it's not your voice I'm hearing instead of your father. I'm thoroughly convinced right now that it's your voice. But
yeah.
We asked your dad to give us a State of the Union. It was like a minute. Give us the State of the Union address on the NFL, college football with the portal and NIL money, and Major League Baseball. Let's start off with the NFL. Can you give us a 1-minute synopsis on the State of the Union for the NFL?
NFL is the king of the jungle. I mean, it seems like everything the league does, it turns to gold. It doesn't matter if you might disagree with a decision here or there that Roger Goodell has made as commissioner. But I mean, whatever you're talking about, this product, they continue to expand, not only in television and now streaming, but also around the world and where all that's going. I would just suggest, from my very humble opinion, I read the other day where they haven't taken off the board the potential of having a Super Bowl out of the United States. I think that's a very bad idea. I think it's a really look. There will come a line where when is enough enough. Okay. And I don't tell anybody in their lives when is enough enough. That's up to them and their families and everything else. But when you start going to potentially putting not potentially, they did last year. When you start drifting down that road of putting playoff games behind a paywall, look, people paid for it because it's the NFL.
Right.
And the playoffs, you want to put some regular season games behind a paywall. Okay. See how it goes. But I wouldn't move the Super Bowl out of the United States of America, because this is America's sport, without a doubt.
David Fulcher, do you remember when Lance McAllister said, "I hope it's not the goose that kills the golden egg"?
That's right.
Lance
That's
said
right.
the same
Killing
thing.
the goose that's laying the golden eggs with
Exactly right.
Monday night.
They're the king.
Sunday night, Friday night. He's worried, and then you're basically adding on to that.
Yeah.
Well, the players are complaining about the 17, 18 game schedule. Oh, so really an 18 game schedule is not really an 18 game schedule. You just eliminate 4 or 5 preseason games and make them 2, which I think you need more preseason games so guys can get in football shape instead of dragging the season on like they're doing it. And they're talking about giving them 2 buys. They're trying to change it to give 2 buys during the season. I still think that's too long. When I was playing, I thought it was too long. We had training camp up in Wilmington.
Yeah.
We were up there 8 weeks, 8 weeks or 2-a-days. And I'm telling you, that was brutal. And our 2-a-days wasn't like today's 2-a-days where you can put on shorts. We had full gear on every day. And every practice was full gear, and we hit every day. And these guys are complaining about I won't call it cupcake, but somewhere in that area, cupcake of a practice where you just got on shorts and you're just thudding each other up with your shoulder. But once again, I think it makes sense when you said, Tom, that they should never go move Super Bowls. This is America's sport. I think baseball is America's pastime, but football is a football sport for here.
Yeah, no doubt.
So let's move on to David normally asks us. I'll just keep going with the same question. The status of college football, and included in that answer, Tom, let's talk about the portal, what it's done to college football, and NIL.
Well, look, I think we all agree that players should be getting paid at the college level because these schools are making so much money off the television deals. So I have no problem with NIL, name, image, likeness, for these guys getting some money. But going into the college game this year for the first time in a long, long time, I have to tell you, David, we are going down the path, and we're already there, but we're going deep into the woods here soon. Unless they get somebody or somebodies to step in and fix this thing. And man, it's a huge job. It's people a lot smarter than I'll ever be to try and fix it. But you basically are getting to a point now where there are schools playing in one league and then there are schools playing in another league. When I go do a football game at NC State or Wake Forest, and those schools have put out a lot of really good football players, man, or I go to the University of Virginia or the University of North Carolina, they're not playing the same game that Ohio State is playing. They're not playing the same game that Alabama and Georgia, even Ole Miss. I had a game earlier this year, Ole Miss against Wake Forest. The number 2 player in the transfer portal this past year out of Texas A&M was the number 1 high school player in the country 2 years ago, a defensive lineman who plays for Ole Miss. He's making more money this year than the entire Wake Forest team.
Wow.
Now, you can say, starting lineup, you can say, well, hey, the Ole Miss, people stepped up and the Wake Forest people haven't. And that's fine. There's probably some truth to that. But all I'm saying is I'm very worried where we're going, really worried, where we're going in the college game as far as, the one big knock I still have on baseball because of the salary cap, whether you like that or not, is, when you
go ahead and move into baseball.
Okay, well, but just to finish the football thing is that it's hard. It's getting harder and harder for a lot of schools to compete. Now, there's some good things about the transfer portal in that if a 4 or 5 star guy doesn't work out at Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia or wherever, they can come to Marshall or they can come to North Carolina State and all of a sudden become this great big star. I've got UNLV at Oregon State this weekend. The kid who was a 5-star recruit out of high school in Florida, wide receiver, goes to Michigan State, doesn't play for 2 years. Now he's going to be first-team All-American in back-to-back years, and he's going to the NFL next year. So
yes,
there are good things about the transfer portal. But I worry about the future, about how they're going to get this fixed. There are a lot of smart people that can get it fixed. As for baseball, and I think, David, that's where you were going next. And there are those analytics people out there that will tell you, and Major League Baseball likes to pat itself on the back and tell you that, well, look at all these small market teams that are making the playoffs in the World Series every year. It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Okay. There will be an outlier like there is in every walk of life from time to time. There's going to be something and you just can't explain it, in this or that business or socially or whatever it might be, you can't explain it, right? I can't explain how I was able to marry the woman I'm married to this day. Total outlier. So, right. So,
hey, Tom, we call that when you outkicked your coverage.
That's exactly right.
There you go.
Yeah. Twice kicked.
Yes.
But with baseball, at the end of the day, and we're already seeing it already, even in the playoffs this year, you had New York, a second New York, an LA, and you had Cleveland. Now, does Cleveland come back from 2-0 to beat the Yankees? Maybe they do, and maybe they're that outlier that Kansas City was in 2015. And all these people that pointed to Moneyball and the Oakland A's, they never won a World Series. They never got to a World Series.
Yeah.
They talk about, the Tampa Bay Rays. Look everything they've done. Okay, well, right. But, they caught lightning in a bottle, and yeah, they've had some nice teams to get to the playoffs, but inevitably they lose. The teams that spend the most money and have the most money are generally in baseball the ones that are winning. And there's probably going to be a World Series champion this year from either New York or Los Angeles, and the beat goes
a lot of money.
They've done good things. Pitch clock, phenomenal for the game. Phenomenal for the game.
So you like the pitch clock?
Love the pitch clock. I mean, it's totally changed the game. The younger crowd, which they want something to happen right now. They can actually go to a baseball game and stick around for 2 hours and 20 minutes instead of 3 hours and 30 minutes, and It's a much more appealing game. It's on the comeback a little bit. It's never going to be what it once was. And as long as the people who run that sport realize that really their competition now is the NBA and then to a lesser extent the NHL. There is no more competition for the NFL and for that matter, college football.
Yeah. That's pretty good, man. Well, listen, I don't have much more, man. I really appreciate you. I know we've been going back and forth trying to get this done, man, and we finally got it done. And the first person that told me when I get you to let him know, and that was your dad. So I'm gonna tell Dad later on. I finally got him. I appreciate
you'll tell him his son's a pain in the ass, but we got it done. We found a way to get it done.
I'm gonna tell him that, you know what, he was a little bit better than you, Dad.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
He ain't gonna want to hear that.
Sure he is.
He ain't gonna want to hear that.
No, he doesn't.
They say if the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and
it doesn't, man.
It surely didn't. Two of my favorite shows we've ever done.
Yes.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh man, we're just. I think you're gonna make Paul pretty happy because Paul talked about you more than he did talk about your dad, and I'm like, well, Paul, we gotta get one at a time, man. We gotta get one at a time. But I'm pretty sure I can make it happen, and I'm glad we did.
Let's make Paul happier. I'll bring this to a close on behalf of Thom Brennaman and my co-host David Fulcher. This is David Coleman. You've been listening to Overtime Life After the Spotlight. Please share this episode with those that need to hear it. A lot of fun things and important things were covered. Please visit Bootleggers Music Group, the website. Please download our app, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Overtime with NFL All-Pro David Fulcher and co-host, award-winning speaker David Coleman on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio. Be sure to catch all our shows and music by downloading our app at bootleggersmusicgroup.com. All content is published and owned by the Bootleggers Music Group, LLC, and Zasco Publishing, and may not be duplicated without prior written consent. Executive producer, Paul E. Jones.